Welcome to the Semi-Interesting Podcast, where we explore some of the unique legal issues in the global semiconductor industry. My name is Nathaniel Lusak. I'm an IP attorney at the law firm of Hodgson Russ, and one of your hosts.
I'm Elizabeth Morris. I'm an IP attorney and director of intellectual property and product at Pure Storage in Mountain View, California, and I am one of your hosts.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about invention disclosures. How do you maximize the number of invention disclosures that you receive, or rather, how do you know that you're not overlooking any invention disclosures that you should have received? There's lots of reasons why you'd want to maximize the number of invention disclosures coming in. You want to protect the intellectual property on your commercial products, obviously, but you also want to have a strong pipeline for things that are still in R&D and haven't hit the commercial shelves yet. You also might need those invention disclosures if you're an in-house counsel in order to hit your metrics. But where do you go to be sure that all your protectable IP is accounted for? And how can you be sure that all your inventors have submitted an invention disclosure? To talk about that today and more, we're joined by Sabra Truesdale from Western Digital. Sabra, thank you so much for joining today. If you wouldn't mind, could you give the audience a quick introduction?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabra Truesdale. I'm an in-house patent counsel at Western Digital. I've been here for a little over 8 years. I'm one of 6 patent counsel that manage Western Digital's patent portfolio. And my background was in computer science for undergrad and grad school. Then I went to law school, worked at a law firm for about a dozen years as a patent prosecutor, and then went in-house here at Western Digital. And so my main responsibilities are helping manage the patent portfolio, but also our female inventor program, which is called She Invents, and I'll talk about that later today.
So I have Western Digital products at home. I have hard drives. Can you give us a quick sense in terms of what the inventing force looks like at Western Digital and where everyone is located? How far are they spread out?
Sure. So it helps to know the history of Western Digital. So Western Digital is actually a combination of 3 very large companies that merged at different times. So originally, going back in chronological order, we had IBM. IBM invented the hard drive back in the 1950s. Now, eventually, IBM decided to spin off its hard drive division, and that became Hitachi Global Storage Technologies. And then that became HGST, and then HGST was acquired by the company known as Western Digital. So in parallel, there was that Western Digital company, which was started in the 1970s. So that Western Digital company acquired HGST. And then later, that Western Digital company, which included HGST, acquired SanDisk. So Western Digital is those 3 companies put together. So the legacy, there was the IBM hard drive division, which was HGST, included hard drives, but also solid state and research, pure research. And then we had the legacy Western Digital company, which was pretty much hard drives, but some solid state. And then we had the SanDisk company, which was all solid state. And so together, we cover hard drives, we cover solid state, and we cover pure research in both those areas, the fundamental technologies underpinning hard drives and solid state drives. And then in terms of our footprint, it's the footprint of those 3 companies put together, with some changes and consolidation over the years. So we are definitely an international company. We have large R&D centers in the United States, in India, in Israel, in Japan. We also have manufacturing. We manufacture our own products, kind of soup to nuts, from the very base components of the SSDs and the HDDs, all the way through to consumer products. We have manufacturing facilities, for example, in the Philippines and Thailand and Malaysia. So we are definitely an international company. And then, of course, in addition to R&D and manufacturing, then we have all our sales offices, et cetera.
Wow, it sounds like you guys are just everywhere, and that must be, especially hard to keep in touch with inventors around the world and keep them feeling engaged and interested in submitting invention disclosures. I know you teased about this just a little bit during your introduction. One thing that I'm very interested in, because my own company has sort of a similar program, is what is She Invent as it's focused on female inventors, and how does that work? Especially how does that work internationally?
So yes, She Invents is our female inventor program. And the origin, the kind of reason why we created the program is because we had read a report from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO. It was published back in 2019 called the Progress and Potential Report. And it found that although in the United States, for the technical workforce, it was about 20% female, when you look at the inventor population at the USPTO, the patent applications that the USPTO processes and issues, the females were only 10%. So although females were 20% of the workforce, they were only 10% of the inventor population. So we read that report and we said, hey, we should run our own numbers at Western Digital. So we ran our numbers and they were very similar. Around 20% of our technical staff was female and around 10% of our inventors were female. So we said, why is there this disparity? Like I said, it's not just Western Digital. It's pretty much every tech company worldwide, slightly different if you're in a biotech or chemistry area, because women are more prolific in those areas. But when you're talking about computer companies, our numbers are pretty standard with all the other companies. So we said, what can we do to fix this? Because ideally, we would like the headcount percentage of female staff to be similar to the inventor percentage for that. That was the inception for the She Invents program. And so we started just thinking about it and running the numbers in late 2019. And then in early 2020, I started doing a literature review to say, what has been done in this area? Because the USPTO report, the Progress and Potential report, led a lot of companies to look at this, and lots of work was starting to be done. So I was looking at what other companies have done and recommended, and I came across a lot of great resources. And then from all that information, we decided to, kind of put the program together. So She Invents really just refers to all of our efforts across, many different areas. And so, one of the efforts was sending a survey to all of our technical staff worldwide. It went out to 12,000 people, just asking them questions, demographic questions, so we could know who was answering without them giving us their name because it was anonymous. And then correlating the demographic information with their patent experience inside the company, and then also some of their views on patenting and being an inventor. So that was one aspect of the She Invents program, was running the survey and analyzing the data. Another aspect of the She Invents program was an intranet site that I created so that anyone who was interested in, any female technical staff who were interested in patenting could have a special place to go. We already had a patent page on our intranet, but this one was specific to the female inventors and it had resources targeted at them. Of course, any novice inventor could benefit, from looking at the resources on the website, but there were additional resources for them. So when I created the intranet site, I thought, well, if I were a female technical staff and I didn't know anything about the patent program, what did I need to know? So we had information on, for example, I drafted a document. So you have an idea, what do you do next? I mean, obviously, that's a good document for anyone to read in the company, but She Invents was the impetus for creating the document. So now the document's out there, everyone in the company can see it and benefit from it, even though originally it was supposed to be a She Invents resource. So that's just one example. Another example of a resource that everyone can benefit from was a video that explains how to complete our invention disclosure form. When you're an inventor or a technical staff member and you want to give your idea to the patent department so that they can evaluate it, you complete our invention disclosure form. And so I created a video that walks people through the questions on the form and specifically, why are we asking the questions from a patent point of view? Why is this important? Again, the impetus for creating the video was to help female inventors, but really it's beneficial to everybody. And then there are some resources on our intranet site that are specific to female technical staff. For example, we have a list of selected patents that Western Digital owns where there's a female inventor listed. And that can be helpful in case you want to find a female inventor at the company in a certain area, for example, to ask them a question, maybe to mentor you about your invention disclosure. So I keep that list going. That's just, any patent that has a female inventor listed on it that we own. Similarly, I have a list of any profiles that people have done of female technical staff, whether inventors or not. And that's, again, another way that not only can people find maybe a mentor in the company or someone to help them review their invention disclosure, but they can also say, hey, these women did it, I can do it too. It's like if you can see it, then you can be it. And so that's another resource that we have on our intranet site. So that's another aspect of She Invents. And then yet another aspect is mentoring. So we created some mentoring programs where we pair novice female technical staff with experienced inventors. They could be male or female. And together they work to create invention disclosures and submit them. And it's the senior inventors, the more experienced inventors, mentoring the junior women inventors.
So based on the research and the feedback that you received, what kind of barriers were in the way of some either your female inventors or other underrepresented inventors to submitting invention disclosures? What do you think caused the gap between the 20% workforce but only 10% inventorship rate?
Yeah, so in my literature review, I tried to find out, what other people had thought might be the causes of this gap. And so then when we created our survey, we deliberately asked questions to try and get at this information for our inventor population. So based on the survey, the possible root causes of this, we call it underparticipation in our invention process. So the possible root causes were information gap, confidence gap, social norms, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome. So I'm going through them in order. Information gap refers to when a female technical staff or any novice inventor is not participating because they lack information about the patent process. So it could be information about that it even exists, like not everyone at the company even, I wish, I'm a patent attorney, I wish everyone knew that it existed, but, depending on your onboarding programs in each country, they may not know that we even have a patent process. And then if they do know that there's a patent process, they might not know the right ways to go about it, and the best ways to go about it. And that's why, I drafted the document about, I have an idea, now what? Or the video about how to complete our invention disclosure form. So that's one root cause, is an information gap. The second root cause is confidence gap. So this is a question where maybe you have all the information, but you feel like you don't. You feel like you're at a disadvantage. You feel like other people in the company have more information than you because there was never an effort made to show this is the level playing field. Everyone is getting the same information. So sometimes underrepresented inventors, such as women, will lack the confidence because they'll just think, oh, I must be missing something, or maybe there's more information out there and I just don't know it. So for us to kind of clearly lay out the information and put it on an intranet site so that everyone has access to it, that should help people with their confidence. And also just knowing that they have the information and that it's sufficient and that they can go forward. That's part of the confidence gap. So then social norms as a root cause, that's kind of the, if you can't see it, then you can't be it. Typically, at least up until recently in mass media, whether it's, novels or TV shows or movies, scientists and engineers used to be always shown as white males. So when you're an underrepresented group, whether based on gender, based on race or ethnicity, or LGBTQ status or disability status, when those people are not portrayed in the mass media as being inventors or scientists or engineers, then the people of those groups feel like maybe I shouldn't be here. There's a reason, like maybe there's no one like me, I'm unusual and maybe I shouldn't be pursuing this career, or I shouldn't be trying to patent. I shouldn't be participating in the patent process. So those are the social norms. And so that's just one example of what we were trying to address with the intranet site for She Invents, when we had, here's a list of patents at our company with female inventors listed. So they did it, you can do it too. And also our list of profiles of female technical staff, they did it, you can do it too. Learn more about them, see what you have in common by reading the profiles. Another possible root cause is perfectionism. So women, at least for underrepresented groups, they tend to want a document to be perfect before they submit it, for example, or any kind of project. So I don't know if you've heard the social science research But there was a study done where there was a job listing, and the job listing had like 10 requirements on it. And for women who were applying to that job listing, they only applied if they had all 10 of their requirements. And the male applicants would apply if they only had like 5 of their requirements. And that's just some kind of, I don't know why that is, but it's just the psychology of men versus women, that the women just want to be 100% sure on everything, make sure they're totally prepared. And so the women would tend to filter themselves out unless they had 100% of the job requirements, whereas the men would just be like, oh, that's fine, I can do half, I'll learn the rest on the job or whatever. And so it's the same thing, though, when it comes to invention disclosures. So the women think, unless they've been, trained and educated in our patent process, they think, oh, I have to have all the answers. It has to be perfect. I have to have all my data lined up before they'll submit the invention disclosure. And so then sometimes they just filter themselves out. They self-select out of the process and they never submit it. Or it takes them so long to perfect it before they submit it that it's too onerous, it's too time consuming. Whereas the men will just like dash off a paragraph and submit it, which is not sufficient, but it just shows the other end of the spectrum. So part of the, battling this perfectionism root cause is to explain to the inventors what is actually needed when you submit an invention disclosure. How much information is needed? We don't need you, for example, to write the patent application. We definitely don't want you to write the patent application, We want you to describe your idea in such detail that we understand how it works, but maybe you don't have to have all the experimental data to back it up. You can submit your idea, we can give you feedback on it, then you can revise it and improve it. And so if you instead spend like hours and hours trying to make everything perfect, then you're never going to submit it, or you're only going to submit like 1 or 2 a year because they take too long. So that's the perfectionism root cause. And then finally, there's imposter syndrome. If you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it just has to do with the people who don't see themselves in certain roles, like the social norms that we were talking about. They tend to think, oh, if I actually made it into one of those roles, I must have, I faked it, or I cheated, or I fooled people. I don't really belong here. So that's imposter syndrome. And so even if, there's a woman technical staff and, she got her engineering degree and she's working at the job and she's doing great, and she still thinks, oh, I really don't know what I'm doing, so I shouldn't be participating in the patent process, and I'm not as smart, or my ideas aren't as good. That's the imposter syndrome. And so we just need to, I think that if you just use all these resources that we've put together, including the mentoring, that it would help people overcome the imposter syndrome.
It sounds like you have gone about the efforts of She Invents at this, at this very academic level, right? Where you have identified these specific things and tried to really address each one, with the video and the article for information gap and the confidence gap, making sure that everything was available to them on the website, the social norms with the profiles of these people, et cetera. It seems to me like it would have been very successful because you knew the data going in and you were working on addressing it. What have you seen? What has been the effect of being in charge of this She Invents program?
So as I mentioned, we first started looking into the possibility of the program in late 2019 and early 2020. Then the pandemic hit. We had all these grand ideas of, oh, I'm going to go on a road trip to all these offices, around the world and talk to them about the program. And nope. So everything went virtual very fast. But so in terms of numbers, our fiscal year, which is, how we do all our, goals and our statistics that we have to calculate. So our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So we decided that the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2020 would be our baseline, because we hadn't really done anything with the program at that point. We were just thinking about it and working on it behind the scenes. So that was our fiscal year 20. So we compared the data from that year, fiscal year 20, to the data from fiscal year 22. So that was the year ending on June 30th of 22. And we did just finish our next fiscal year, but we haven't run all the data from that yet. So we compared fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 22. We actually had great results. We had an 88% increase in female inventor participation. So if you're familiar with, measuring representation of inventors, there are many, many different ways to calculate representation. What we decided to focus on was invention disclosures, as Nathaniel mentioned during the introduction, because that is the very first step of any patent process, is to get the ideas from the inventors, enter them into a system, and then they can go forward from there. So we're focusing on invention disclosures, and we're focusing on who is listed as an inventor for the invention disclosures. You could alternatively, or in addition, focus on who is the lead inventor or who submitted the invention disclosure. But currently, we're just treating everyone the same who's listed as an inventor on an invention disclosure. So when we figured out our 88% increase, what we did was, for a particular fiscal year, we would get the names of anyone who is listed on as an inventor on any invention disclosure, and we just have a list of unique names. And so then we said, which of these people were female? So once we have a list of names for a fiscal year, anyone who was an inventor on any invention disclosure, then we said, okay, how many of those people are women? Okay, so we get that number for fiscal year 20, and then we got that number for fiscal year 22, and it increased by 88%. So we had the pool of women named on invention disclosures from fiscal year 20 to 22. That number went up by 88%, which is great.
Yeah, that's really incredible. It's great to see that you put in place a program and you were addressing these specific issues and you've seen technical, measurable increase over time. That's congratulations.
Thanks.
Since this was such a resounding success, I mean, what's next for it? How can you expand it? How can you bring it to other underrepresented groups or other areas of the company that are maybe also suffer from the same underparticipation?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, while She Invents focuses on women participating in our patent process, we do recognize that additional demographics are traditionally underrepresented when it comes to patenting, such as based on race and ethnicity, LGBTQ status, disability status, etc. We don't have those numbers for our staff, for example, at Western Digital, because that's not tracked. And so that's one issue. Like, we started with women because we had the data and that's more readily available. It's also possible for some companies, you could guess based on name, the gender, but you can't guess based on name, LGBTQ, disability, et cetera. So we recognize that there are other underrepresented groups. And so as part of the program, when we identify information gaps, like I mentioned earlier, and we create resources to address those gaps, then the resources are available to everyone in the company, and hopefully they can help other underrepresented groups in addition to women. But the other thing that we do to try and help people join the patent process is have like a road show, not necessarily in person because we're still, not necessarily in COVID times, but now we're in budget crunch, et cetera. So I've been doing virtual road shows. The road shows have been in name based on She Invents, but it's addressing all these same root causes that could affect any underrepresented inventor, like imposter syndrome and social norms. So I have been arranging with our engineering groups to give a presentation to subsets of the engineering group, since we have thousands of people, based on geography or based on business unit, and trying to get the word out that way. And this way I can also publicize the resources that we've created so that people who want to get more involved in the patent process have a way of doing so.
One thing that my company has been thinking about doing, I'm just wondering if you guys are doing this, is specifically presenting to particular ERG groups that, work on some of those. So I'm sure you have a women's ERG, but, there tend to be others like that. It's not something that we've even implemented ourselves yet, but I know our women's group is asking, but now I'm thinking that, it would be really good to focus on some of the other ERGs as well.
Yeah, I agree. We do have a women's ERG, and I have presented to them. And I'm also on the board of our women's ERG, which helps me figure out what they're working on and how She Invents can help them and partner with them. So that's also beneficial for me to be more involved in our women's ERG called We.Win, Women's Impact Network. But we do have other ERGs focusing on other affinity groups. And I have not done roadshows for them, but that's on the list of things. I'm kind of starting with the engineering groups instead, and hoping that, I can hit everyone that way too, in the engineering groups. But definitely the affinity groups, like those employees who join affinity groups and are active affinity groups, they have a higher engagement level with the company. And so they would be good people to present to because they would really take it to heart and spread the word.
I could definitely see that. I mean, I would just I know you were saying it's really hard to get data, like you did for the 88%, but it would be so exciting if you could figure out how to really replicate that in another group. I know we have a group in my company that is specifically for newer employees, and that's been a focus. We've had sometimes new employees just tend to be more diverse, at least at our company. And so that can be a way to kind of spread the news. And they tend to be less informed about what patents are. So they're, more interested in learning too. So I don't know. That's another thing we're thinking about doing ourselves. So
no, that's a great idea. That's probably the first other ERG that I should get involved with, because we do have one, we call them like early career stage. And so that they would be a good one to talk to.
Yeah, and maybe it doesn't quite fit with one of these categories of underrepresentation, but it's sort of is at least easy to measure, right? It's very easy to get from HR, how many people have been working here for less than 5 years that have submitted an invention disclosure. Okay, I'm going to change topics just a little bit. As you were saying at the very beginning of your introduction, Western Digital is a very worldwide company and has a lot of sites around the world because of its predecessor companies that are now all part of Western Digital. Have you found that some components of She Invents or any other things that you do to try to increase inventor engagement and disclosure submission have worked better or worse in particular geographies around the world?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that because we're in so many countries worldwide and just the cultures are so different in those countries, then definitely something that works in one country may not work in another country. So one thing that's good is that in Israel, they were the ones who created the very first mentoring program. And when they created it, it wasn't even part of She Invents. We just had a really prolific female inventor in Israel, and we had our patent department kind of representative in Israel. And together they created the mentoring program. And it was the first female-focused mentoring program for our company. And I was not involved. They created it on their own. I was there in the kickoff meeting, and then we kind of brought them under the She Invents umbrella, but it was all their idea. And it worked great. They were the ones that figured out, we should have groups of, roughly 4 people, where you have the 2 junior female inventors and then the 2 senior inventors, male or female, and that the goal was to create and submit invention disclosures. So those 2 people, the prolific female inventor and our patent department employee in Israel, they did all that. So that was great. And that program has been replicated now, especially in India. We did a very small pilot program in a U.S. engineering team, but really it's gained traction in India. So in India, they expanded that idea. In Israel, it was relatively small. I forget exactly how many teams they had, maybe 10 to 15 teams. But in India, there are dozens and dozens of teams, and they've been running it in phases because so many people want to do it. So that was an example of an idea that started in Israel and then worked really well other places.
That's great. I think it's really exciting and interesting that especially that program was sort of kicked off by an especially excited, prolific inventor. I think the training champions is something that, gets talked about in the context of trying to really, help bring new people up. It's great to have a champion, but how do you get to the point where you have a good champion? Can you train them? Pieces like that.
Yeah, I think for India, again, I'm not that familiar with Indian culture or our offices there, although a lot of my inventors are from there. But I've heard that in general, our engineering teams in India are just very excited, engaged, and want to participate in programs. So that was helpful. But I can also tell you that we did other things. I guess one thing I didn't mention with She Invents is I mentioned that we have a listing of profiles of female technical staff. But I didn't say that we actually seeded that listing by partnering with our internal corporate marketing team to create profiles. So we leveraged our internal team to write, a profile about someone from the US and then someone from India and someone from China and, someone from Japan. And so those profiles were then featured on the front page of our corporate intranet so that everyone could see them. And then, of course, they got added to the list of profiles on the She Invents page. But so that is a good way to get technical staff in various countries excited because, look, we're highlighting one of your own from your country or your business unit. So that also helped, I think, get the excitement up in India. We also had, as a kickoff, when we were first starting the mentoring program in India, we had 2 virtual roundtables One was about kind of more senior engineering leadership and me talking about the She Invents program and talking about just the importance of patenting at that level. And then there was a second video conference that was a panel of women who were more like junior or like mid-level engineers and staff and with their experiences with inventing. And so I think that also helped get the women in India interested in the program. And so by the time they had signups, like there was just a lot of interest.
Because this has been such a success, I mean, I assume that there's impetus internally to then continue this, grow it, see if you can expand it. So in terms of takeaways from this, besides the increased percentage and participation, I mean, what next steps are you thinking about? And then also for those people at other companies that are listening that are thinking that this solves a problem that I have, how do you port this over? Is it as simple as just having that resources on a website, or is there another trick to it in order to implement it?
So for our next steps, we want to have more mentoring programs because those, I think, are the best way to get women over that hurdle of creating their first invention disclosure. Because it's like when you're trying to write a paper and you're staring at a blank page. It's the same thing when you're technical staff and you have an invention disclosure form. Like, where do I start? If you can just get people, kind of in the door and working on their first invention disclosure, then once they realize that it's not that bad, and like we're here to help them and they can revise it, once they send it to us, it doesn't have to be set in stone. They can improve it later. So the best way to teach them that is to have them be in a mentoring program. But as I mentioned, we don't have that, the India mentoring program is pretty much up and running. Then you run across an issue of, okay, too many people are applying to the program as a mentee. How do you find the mentors, right, to staff the program? That's another problem. The Israel program, it ran once for one fiscal year, and then it hasn't run again. The US pilot program ran for one fiscal year and hasn't run again. And so it's just, we need to expand the mentoring opportunities because it's really benefits any first-time inventor, to be mentored. But we have limited resources and the mentors who are available. So currently for the mentoring programs, the mentees need to be female technical staff. So, but that's the main thing for us to do is to expand these mentoring programs. But it takes a lot of time, like the engineering group has to be on board with it. Somebody has to administer the program. I can't do it, and then we need all the mentors, to meet with the mentees. And obviously it takes time on the mentees part too, but it's like, it's their decision if they want to participate in the program. But if the mentees want to participate, we need to find the mentors, So that's the main thing that we need to do is expand the mentoring programs. In terms of other companies addressing this problem, I mean, I mentioned a lot of specific things that we did at our company, and I think doing any of them is better than doing nothing, I mean, we're spreading information, we're trying to normalize, women being inventors. But, beyond what I said, if you want some kind of organized set of, suggestions for what to do, there are several resources out there that I used when I was creating the program. So there's the Intellectual Property Owners Association. I'm trying to remember the name of the committee, but essentially they have, I think it's the Women's Committee of the IPO, and within the Women's Committee, they had something about underrepresented inventors. And now it's just, and so they call it the diversity toolkit. So initially it was a gender diversity toolkit to help, reach more inventors. But now it's just diversity toolkit because it's all underrepresented inventors, not just based on gender. So the IPO has that diversity toolkit, which is very helpful. And that it's not just things that you can do to reach the inventors. It's also before that, how do you get your executives on board to realize that this is a problem and that should be solved? So the IPO toolkit is very helpful. Another one is the Santa Clara University Law School. They met with a whole bunch of in-house counsel at different companies and, asked them what they're doing. And so they came out with the best practices. I forget if they called it a manual or a guidebook or a toolkit, but Santa Clara University Law School is another great publication to read. The Intellectual Property Owners Association and Santa Clara Law School, those are the two best ones so far in terms of amassing a bunch of recommendations from different sources together. I mean, you can also look up individual companies now have, reports or articles or websites where they focus on their own efforts, which is also helpful. So that's what I would say if you're just starting out in this area. One other resource I want to mention is the Increasing Diversity and Innovation organization, which they had a conference back in 2021. They're having a new conference now in 2023, coming up in August 1st. They have a diversity pledge that companies join, saying that they are going to try to improve the diversity of their inventors at their company in terms of people participating in their patent process. And so that's another good source of information. So that's Increasing Diversity and Innovation.
Sabra, I think that's where I met you, is that we were both on some committees there and discussing, how to measure these things and how we were moving forward with that. I did want to say just something else about that conference, which I was very impressed that conference is being held or sponsored by the U.S. Patent Office. As you said, this sort of all got kicked off by this report that the Patent Office put together, and then everybody, working towards trying to make progress. And, sounds like Western Digital has done a really, a leader in the space of making measurable progress there. So very exciting to see it kind of come full circle and have a conference where everybody can get together and talk about, what progress has happened over the past several years.
Yeah, and it's nice that the conference is hybrid. So if you're in the DC area or have the means to travel to the DC area, you can see it in person at the PTO, or you can attend virtually.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they're doing that, especially now, like you were saying, we kind of just got through COVID and now we're all at budget cuts, and it really is nice that they've made both options available.
We really want all of our technical staff to be participating in the patent process. We don't want those ideas to be left behind, because if they're not disclosed to the legal department, to the patent department, we can't protect them, and they might go into the products, but they're not going to become trade secrets. They're not going to become patents. And so they're not benefiting the company as much as they could be. And I'm not even talking about people coming up with new ideas. These are just the ideas they come up with on a daily basis during their jobs. They just need to disclose them in an invention disclosure to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just so important to get everyone involved and everyone to feel like they can contribute and know how to, right? And know where to go. Oh my goodness. Yeah, what great progress. But I think a lot of passion. And it really comes through in this podcast. So thank you so much for sharing all your insights and, the details of how this program came about, and hope to see you at that conference in August.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great talking with you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Semi-Interesting Podcast. You can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube.
And if you enjoyed the episode, we always appreciate 5-star reviews. While we talked about legal issues, none of the information shared during this podcast is intended to be legal advice. If you have any questions about information we cover or ideas for a future episode, feel free to contact me or the other attorneys at Hodgson Russ. You can find contact information at www.hodgsonruss.com.